We got one more guest, one more segment here for this Wednesday edition of the show. That is with Wes Reynolds at Wes Reynolds, the #1 on Twitter. Regular contributor to VSIN and the Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, how's it going today, man?
Hey, Adam. Good to be with you. How are you, man?
Doing very well, buddy. Appreciate your time as always here, sir. And look, let's go ahead and start by talking about Super Bowl 54, San Francisco and Kansas City. -1 with extra juice, by and large, the predominant number out there in the offshore marketplace. Total in the 54, 54.5 range. Before we dig into any specifics about this game, what do you think about the side and total here?
Yeah, and obviously Kansas City has taken a little bit of the money early, but I don't think because they're so long in between this game with still a week and a half to go, I don't think you want to draw too much conclusions in the number and just assume, okay, the money's just going to keep necessarily pouring in on Kansas City. I can absolutely see San Francisco money, and I could see a flip of a favorite here, but it's never going to get to 3 on either side. It's going to trade between 1, 1.5, maybe 2. I mean, that's what you're going to get. So ordinarily, I mean, it's not going to be like when we talk about NFL cards from a week-to-week basis, especially during the regular season, you pretty much know if you talk to bookmakers or you listen to bookmakers on various forms of media, you pretty much know what side you're going to need. You're going to know that there's going to be usually a couple really defined, I guess, public or casual sides where it's like, okay, we're going to need a couple of these dogs to kill these teasers, or I mean, it's just week to week. It's every single week that you're going to have that. Well, with just one game, and especially with a game like this where it's pretty darn even, you're going to see support on both sides. So you're probably going to hear when you have different bookmakers on, one of them or listen to them, one of them is going to say, well, we're a little more skewed to the Kansas City side. And then another book is going to say we're more skewed to the San Francisco side. So there's really not going to be, and what makes it interesting is that there's not going to be a lot of uniformity per se, because you can really make both arguments for both teams. There's not, I think, a clear favorite in this game, with the point spread pretty much being just 1 everywhere. But on the total side, obviously, it's been all over. I think maybe about 20 hours. It took about 20 hours or so. Chris Andrews over at the South Point had a funny tweet. It's like, hey, I finally took an under bet at $200 on the under, because I think Dwayne Colucci at the Rampart, which is the sister book of the South Point, said they had, I think, like 70 some tickets on the over. Now, this is less than a day from everything being up. They had like 70 over tickets, and they could vary from thousands of dollars to $20-$30. But they had like 75 over tickets and like 1 under ticket. This was as of Monday night. So yeah, I could see this over. I think anybody for the under is probably waiting just to see if you're going to get a buyback. It's like, hey, is this going to get to 56? Or if this is going to get to 57, then I think you would see the buyback just on principle on the under.
You know, like you said, I think two-way action's really going to be the theme of this game. And something I talked about a little bit with Brian Blessing on yesterday's show, and something I can get your take on here too, is that, you know, this Super Bowl is the first where we have a lot of states accepting sports betting wagers.
Mm-hmm.
Last year it was what, maybe 4 or 5, something like that. This year it's upwards of 20. So, you know, we're going to have different lines in different markets in different parts of the country. Obviously, we've got, you know, a Great Plains, Midwest type team in Kansas City, a West Coast team in San Francisco. We don't have an East Coast influence here for this one. So the New Jersey and Pennsylvania and West Virginia markets maybe won't be as skewed as they could have been if, say, the Steelers or the Patriots or, you know, somebody like Baltimore or somebody like that was in the Super Bowl here. So that'll be kind of interesting too. But, you know, as I kind of look at this one, I don't see a sharp versus public split, which we, you know, typically do tend to see a little bit in the Super Bowl to a certain degree. We're going to have sharp money on both sides. We're going to have public money on both sides. It's going to be definitely a two-way game where, you know, the money lines are going to be very short prices, whether you get, you know, the chance at plus money on both sides or not. Still going to be very short prices. This one's going to be very interesting, I think, to see where the bottom line kind of comes out, because We're going to have an enormous worldwide handle, an enormous United States handle. Things are going to be very big in New Jersey and Nevada, as we know. There's going to be a lot of money dumped into this game, and I think the books are going to be very, very balanced both ways by and large.
Yeah, I do too. There will be little variations, and the point that you were talking about with Brian Blessing is true in terms of regional. Like, for instance, because this isn't legal everywhere, and it's obviously not legal in California, where you could maybe expect some of the Nevada books, not all, but some could be skewed a little bit more to the San Francisco guides from our side for people traveling over here. But you look on the Kansas City side, you do have Iowa with this legal. So you would expect those books to probably be skewed more toward the Kansas City side. And those Iowa books, I mean, looking who owns them and who represents them, those are basically satellite shops of the William Hills and I think the Caesars is. So those books maybe you could theoretically see skewed toward the Kansas City side. But yeah, there's no pros versus Joes spot here, because you can make a convincing case for really either side.
And again, I mean, the contrast of styles here, too. You've got San Francisco, they run and play great defense. You've got Kansas City, very, very efficient offensively, particularly throwing the football. Run defense, not great. Pass defense, pretty good. But the run defense looked pretty good against Tennessee, kind of taking them out of their element. So, fascinating game. And obviously, with 2 weeks to talk about it, you can beat up every possible angle about this game. But I think this is also going to be a real challenge from a prop betting standpoint, because you've got a lot of high-flying skill position guys for Kansas City up against this great San Francisco defense. And you've got San Francisco with the chance to play ground and pound, keep it away. But how much do you want to take Jimmy G overs or George Kittle overs or something like that? The prop betting market, I think, is the biggest story to me about this game, not just because I think the most value is going to come from it, but just because your view of this game will distinctly shape what your prop betting strategy is. And I think it's tough to figure out what this game flow could actually look like.
Yeah, and we'll find out a little information tomorrow. I mean, everybody does props right now, but the first book that I think really got a name for doing this was clearly Superbook USA over at the Westgate. They've kind of been the king daddies in terms of making these props, not only the general game and player props and team props, but also the cross sport props into the golf tournament over the weekend, or into NBA games, or into they're going to probably have a couple tied into the Wilder Fury fight later this February, or later in February. So they release their first, or most of their stuff, and then they'll add a couple, I think, in the coming days. But tomorrow at 7:00, and you get the line at the Westgate for people getting the first crack at these props, and then that's going to shape the market a little bit. And that's where you're going to be able to get some indicators. And you'll have sharper guys that'll go in there that'll just take numbers and then maybe play back the other way, or then maybe do a little arbitrage where it comes to looking at what these prices are and then what the other books are. So that's really, I think, the prop market is going to keep getting bigger and bigger, because it used to be, your more casual people just for interest in the game, and they would bet the general props. They would bet first touchdown. I mean, everybody likes to bet first touchdown of the game, who scores first, or, your general props. And then will there be a special teams or defensive touchdown? Will there be a safety, or maybe bet alternate point spreads instead? But now, with so many props, and then I saw even at Circa Sports, they put 90 players up in terms of who can score the first touchdown. Like, that's literally the whole roster for both sides. I mean, they're putting punters up. They're putting offensive linemen up. They're putting defensive linemen up. I don't expect most books are going to do that, but they were doing that down there. So, yeah, the prop market is really, I think, going to shape a little bit of how this point spread is going to go and this total is going to go.
Well, and something else, too, it's kind of a corollary point to that is, as we look at New Jersey, something bet where they have, that points betting system where you can kind of make a play and You win X amount over whatever the line is. If it cashes, you lose X amount, of whatever, however far off you were from the number. The points betting thing is kind of difficult to explain if you're not looking right at it. But for example, let's say you take Kansas City -1 with points betting for $100. They win by 7. You win, 7 times that because the line was 1. Well, a lot of these New Jersey books, you've got that DFS influence with DraftKings and FanDuel. You've got PointsBet, which, by and large is built kind of on this prop betting type of style with that points betting format. You've got Circa obviously doing, trailblazing things out there in the Nevada market. You're going to get a lot of different prop betting opportunities here, more than we've ever seen across the different books across the country. And maybe Nevada, at least with what the things that the Gaming Commission will allow them to put up, maybe that sparks some change out there and some more opportunities in terms of the prop betting markets. So, yeah, like you said, it's only going to continue to grow as an extension of this game. By and large, I'm disappointed with what we saw for the national championship game with Clemson and LSU. I don't think I'll be the least bit disappointed with the Super Bowl.
Yeah, exactly. And I think what you would like to see in Nevada, there's only, obviously Westgate, who's been kind of the OGs of this, and like what Circa is doing. A lot of these books maybe aren't as innovative and creative. Part of it is like you said, with the Gaming Commission, because there are times where we'll be on the air at VSIN, and when we're pulling prices, and look, obviously Vegas is part of the name, so that's our home, and a lot of the folks around town come on the air. But we're getting stuff from DraftKings and FanDuel and PointsBet, which of course are not available to bet in the state of Nevada, even though DraftKings and Johnny Avello and those guys just opened an office out here, a new office. But there's no real DraftKings book here in Nevada where they have a brick and mortar and agreement with somebody. So sometimes you look at these other people out of state, and clearly New Jersey is the main influence, at least to start out for them. And it's like you feel like they offer so much more than what are offered here at your traditional Nevada books.
Well, and again, we'll see. The sky is the limit with the Super Bowl. There are so many different things you can bet on. And we'll talk about a lot of our personal prop selections next week on the show once we see some of these numbers come out, once we get a chance to kind of digest what's actually out there in the marketplace. But up until then, right now, Wes, I would say it's NBA and college basketball everyone's kind of focused on. NHL starts the All-Star break tomorrow, so won't be any of those games over the next 4 days after today. But in terms of college basketball, I know that we're both Big Ten guys. I'm actually more of MAC country than anything else, but, Ohio State fan. I know you're from Indiana, so you've followed a lot of Hoosiers basketball here. And the biggest story in the Big Ten this year, man, is that your chances are not very good if you're on the road.
No, not at all, except if you're Illinois last night, which that was a little bit of a not a surprise that they won. Purdue has really struggled offensively this year, even though that seemed to be a good spot for them, considering they got held to 37 points and 0.60 points per possession in Champaign a couple weeks ago. So you're thinking, okay, this is a good spot for them. Illinois is ranked. Illinois might be a little fat and happy. And Purdue led by 1 at halftime. And then the second half, it was all Illinois. So, yeah, it has been very much a home team dominated conference. I think, I believe half of the wins are either at Northwestern or Nebraska now. So if you take those two teams, who I think are clearly the bottom 2 teams in the conference, if you take them out, then you've only got 4 road wins in the Big Ten. But still, you got to get those wins, even though they're not considered great wins at Nebraska or Northwestern. You got to get those wins if you're a team. I was talking about that with some fellow Indiana University alums the other night. It's like, hey, you know what? It's a win on the road. It's a win they needed and that they have to have, because nobody's really winning on the road in this conference this year, at least so far.
So as we look at this thing, and it's astonishing to see a team like Rutgers in the top 15 at a place like Bart Torvik's website. They've got a big game tonight against Iowa. We talked about that in the previous segment with Greg Peterson. You got Rutgers up there. Michigan State, obviously still very good, but 4 losses. And, we know that they had a little bit of a tough start to the season with the the passing of Cassius Winston's brother. Ohio State started out like a ball of fire, and then all of a sudden they kind of fell off the pace a little bit, had some injuries. Maryland may never win a road game. Michigan's really fallen off the pace. Wisconsin's not great. And yet all of these teams getting so much respect here. Minnesota, Indiana, Northwestern, Nebraska, the only teams outside the top 26 for Bart Torvik and Ken Palm's site looks very similar. Who is for real in this conference, Wes, and who just, is probably going to fall back off the pace a little bit?
We're probably not going to know that really until over the next month. I mean, I think Michigan State clearly is for real. They're 6-1 in the league, and they even started a little bit slow. And then everything that you mentioned, surrounding the program with Cassius Winston's brother, et cetera, et cetera. But, they were expected to be at the top of the league, and they are right now, and have some good wins. So they look to be, I think, legitimate. But then you look at pretty much everybody else. Illinois, I think, has been a nice surprise. I think most people had them picked maybe 9th in the league or 10th, and they've been a nice surprise. Rutgers, to determine if they're for real, their defense certainly is. They're probably arguably the best defense in the country. Them and Maryland, I think, look to be the best two defensive teams, and with Purdue not much behind on that side of the ball. But yeah, like Indiana's been very erratic. They at times have good performances, and then at times really have offensive walls and struggle like they did at Rutgers. Penn State, I think is better this season, but you look at them, they're 3-4 in the league. Michigan and Ohio State, if we were to go to the Big Ten tournament today, they would be the 11th and 12th seed in the Big Ten conference tournament, which I don't think anybody expected. I think I wish I could give you, I know they're for real or I know they're not, but I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows.
Well, and it's tough, too, because we're kind of getting to that point in the season here, and some people have already been hopping into the futures market, grabbing some NCAA tournament prices. But as I look at this conference, man, like, all these teams are pretty good. I think Michigan State is great. I think Michigan State is the best team in this conference, as we just talked about. But in terms of, who does what in Indianapolis and then who does what in the NCAA tournament, I don't know. And I know this is the best conference in the country, but again, the game-to-game inconsistency, and maybe it's just because they're playing each other, but I look at this and I don't know how this thing stacks up, a month from now, let alone 2 months from now when we're talking about, the second weekend of the NCAA tournament.
Yeah, exactly. And really, I think the Big Ten, and I know the Big East is power rated 3rd or 4th in some places. I think the Big East is right there with the Big Ten. You look at, nobody in the Big East has an overall losing record for the entire season. I just looked over at the standing, and St. John's is 1-6. Well, they're not bad. This is a St. John's team that beat West Virginia, that went out to Phoenix and beat Arizona on a neutral site. And then you look at them, they're 1-6. And now you look at Butler, who a couple weeks ago you could have said, hey, they're probably, at least today, a number 1 seed in the NCAA tournament. And now they've lost 3 straight. So that's just, I guess, how this conference play is. I mean, it's so very rare, even though you had it a couple times last year, whether it's a high major conference or the lowest of low majors. It is rare to run your table in a conference, even though Gonzaga and Wofford did it last year. So I think, like with Gonzaga dropping from number 1 to number 2, it's like they take that for granted that they're running the table in an improved West Coast conference. It's like that's not a small feat, because you're getting everybody's best shot every single time because you're the premier program in the conference. So, but back to the Big Ten, I mean, I don't know how this is going to shake out in terms of, I think this order, like I look at a program like in Indiana, they could finish anywhere from the top 4 to 10th or 11th in the conference. And I think you could say that for a lot of these teams and really the bulk of the league.
Well, and then obviously to circle this back to betting, I mean, I don't know what to do in this conference on a nightly basis. I mean, yeah, you could sit there and say, okay, well, play the home teams, because home teams, I think, are 64% against the spread here so far in this league. But that either A, won't continue, or B, will really get priced into the number, and we'll start to see a correction with that. I mean, almost, even though this is, such a high-profile conference, the games are on television all the time, I don't know if there's too much nightly betting value in playing this league right now.
Yeah, there really isn't. It's kind of like what you probably have to do because it's so streaky is when you get a team a little bit on a streak, maybe look to play against them in a spot. That's why, even though I think the number's right tonight, I might lean a little bit to Rutgers tonight because I know they've won a couple in a row, but Iowa has won, I think, like 4 in a row. And now they're getting Rutgers, and people are seeing Rutgers ranked and being like, okay, well, that's absurd. Well, now maybe Rutgers comes in with a chip on their shoulder to like prove themselves. Because usually when you get a team that like just gets ranked, that's usually a really good spot to fade them. But I don't know if that's necessarily the case with Rutgers tonight. So, yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you're going to have to do because these teams are going to be just so streaky down the stretches, okay? When you think a team is good and they win 3 or 4 in a row, go against them. And when you think a team is bad and they lose a couple in a row, then you want to buy on them. I mean, that's basically, it seems so simplistic and profound, but I think that's basically what you want to do going forward with the Big Ten this season.
All right, so we leave the hardwood here, and let's talk some golf to finish up this segment here, Wes. 2 tournaments to touch on. One of them starts late tonight out in the Middle East. That is the Dubai Desert Classic. Tommy Fleetwood, your 7-1 favorite. Matthew Fitzpatrick, 10.5 to 11-1. Louis Oosthuizen, 12-1. Henrik Stenson, 18. A lot of pretty good players in this tournament that were just over in Abu Dhabi last week. Now they hang around, play in Dubai. Other players coming stateside for the Farmers Insurance Open, which we'll get to here in a minute. But how did you sort of handicap this one in Dubai this week?
Yeah, Dubai, I think this event at the Emirates Golf Club, it's a little bit more of a strategic course. I think it's a little bit harder. I mean, none of these flat, open desert tracks are necessarily too difficult for the best players in the world. But I think Abu Dhabi, to me, is a little bit more of a strategic course because it's a little more exposed to wind. The wind looks like it's going to blow more toward the back end of the tournament over the weekend. So that could be important. Strokes gained off the tee and greens and regulation are especially important. And they're usually important most weeks when you're looking at statistics. So, yeah, I think this is a little bit different than what we saw a little bit with Abu Dhabi.
All right, so with that in mind here, looking at strokes gained off the tee and some GIRs there, was that a big reason why you took some of the guys you took this week?
Yeah, it is. And I went with Sergio again, and he's anywhere from 20 to 25 to 1. He ended up 8th last week. He was actually, I think, 4th going in the final round. Never really made a move, just didn't really make anything on Sunday. But really, I thought, hit the ball really well. He was 10 under par on the par 5s last week, which was second in the field. And what's really interesting kind of about this Dubai course is there's 4 par 5s, but 3 of them are on the back 9. So they want that because they want some variations and some up and down in the scoreboard. But yeah, I did like Sergio. He's led the field in greens and regulation 3 of 10 times he's played here. Even though he's got some new sticks in the bag, he hasn't signed the equipment deal, but he had some ping sticks in the bag last week. And usually I want to bet against a guy with equipment changes, but I think the course history and the course knowledge of some of these courses probably mitigates that for Sergio. So he's a guy I went with. Shane Lowry at 25 to 1. Lowry doesn't have the best record necessarily here, but he's a regular vacationer in Dubai. So he says he likes the course. And I looked at that price. I was like, maybe somebody knows something here. And I don't know if he's just getting priced there because he's the defending Open champion. But he stood out to me a little bit. Martin Keimer and Danny Willett were kind of the middle guys. Keimer ended up finishing tie for 8th in Abu Dhabi last week where he's won 3 times. But he's got his old bag man, Craig Connolly, on the bag who was on him for both of his major championships. So he was a guy. Danny Willett has a real good history in Dubai. And then another couple guys that I went speculative on just from like the strokes gained off the tee and the GIR standpoint that are triple-digit guys, Adri Arnos and Romain Langest.
I do like the Lowry one a little bit too, especially if you said the wind is expected to kick up a little bit late in the week. And I mean, we saw Lowry play very well in the Open Championship. We know Lowry from that part of the country, Northern Ireland area, where wind can be a big factor too. So I think he's played well in the Irish Open before as well. Shane Lowry's a guy that doesn't mind wind, and if the wind does kick up here in this one, that one does make a lot of sense there. How about the Farmers Insurance Open here at Torrey Pines? Enormous course, very, very long, and a lot of big hitters at the top of the board here too. Rory at 6-1, Rahm 7-1. Tiger's now fallen down below 10-1. He's won this thing 7 times. Schauffele always plays at his best in really good fields, which is what this is. Justin Rose, reigning champ. Matsuyama plays well, usually early on in the year. Gary Woodland can hit it a mile. Ricky Fowler, Tony Finau. A lot of really good players in the tournament this week.
Yeah, and this is always an interesting tournament because the first 2 rounds, they alternate between 2 different courses, the North Course and the South Course. The South Course will take over for the final 36 over the weekend. Actually, the South Course is going to host the U.S. Open again next season. So you've seen these courses get renovated a little bit. The North Course is a Tom Weiskopf design. They've made it a little more difficult, but it's the more scoreable of the two. So usually you want to see guys, and that's where you got to shoot a good round, I think, in order to stay in contention here over the weekend. That's like 7,250 yards. This is 7,700 yards on the Torrey Pines South Course, which has been lengthened and toughened a little bit in preparation for next summer's U.S. Open. But yeah, big hitting. Strokes gained off the tee obviously is very good here in greens and regulation, like I was mentioning before. You don't necessarily have to be a bomber to win here. You've seen some guys that are not, but it always helps. And I went a little bit down the board this week because all those big names you can make cases for. Tiger, Rahm, who's won here before, Rory, you can make a case every single week. He tees it up. Schauffele is a San Diego kid, so he usually you would expect to play well here. But I went with Matsuyama as one of my guys just because he was in contention last year. Only shot 73 on Saturday. That kind of put him behind the 8 ball of Rose, who just absolutely killed this place last year. But Matsuyama, look, he's the ball striking prince of the world. And in the game of golf, he was second in strokes gained tee to green 2 weeks ago when he played in Hawaii and finished 12th, which tells you he didn't make any putts. And that's kind of always the negative with this guy. Tony Finau, kind of a little bit of a short-term horse for course history. 4th and 6th, respectively, back in 2017, 2018. He was on the first page of the leaderboard last week at the American Express, considering he had just come back from playing the event overseas on the Asian Tour. Second on tour, strokes gained tee to green this season. So Finau fits. Snedeker is a guy I just played because he's the ultimate horse for course. Other than Tiger Woods, he's got 2 wins here, 2 runners-up, 6 top 10s in the last 10 years. So he can make sense. Joaquin Niemann at 50-1. Niemann actually has wins on this course, not as a professional, but he won the IMG Academy Junior World Golf Championships in 2015 and 2016. So he does have wins on this course. He made sense. A couple other longer shots. Ryan Palmer, who 4th 2 weeks ago at the Sony Open. Palmer was actually second here 2 years ago, lost in the playoff to Jason Day. So he makes a little sense. And then a speculative guy that's really good in strokes gained off the tee is Cameron Champ, who can really bomb it with about anybody. And I saw him anywhere from 80 to 100-1.
Well, a lot of good names there for the Farmers Insurance Open. A lot of good insights on this show, as always, from Wes Reynolds at Wes Reynolds and the #1 on Twitter. As I mentioned, regular contributor to VSIN. Wes, when are you going to be on here this week?
We'll be on kind of normal schedule for this week. Thursday and Friday night, I split a shift with another host. So 8 to 10 Pacific, Thursday and Friday night. Saturday from 2 to 6 Pacific p.m. and then Sunday 3 to 7 p.m.
Well, of course, as I mentioned, make sure you follow Wes on Twitter at Wes Reynolds of the number 1 and check him out in that VSIN Point Spread Weekly newsletter. Wes, always a pleasure, man. Thank you so much for joining me, and we'll talk to you again next week.
All right. Thanks for having me as always, Adam. Appreciate it.